Whirling Witchcraft. This is a competitive game for 2 to 5 players. I'm not a big fan of the title. I see that they wanted to go for an alliteration, but I think the result was a little bit of a mouthful. A more accurate title would be Potion Class for Backstabbers. But I also see how that maybe wouldn't be quite as catchy or marketable. But this is the idea. It's a better description, honestly. Each player has a workbench represented by this display here. There are ingredients represented by wooden cubes, and when you receive ingredients, you can only place them in the corresponding spaces. So if you receive ingredients, you have already 3, you receive more black cubes or more white cubes and already full, then you can't fit them. The idea is precisely this. You will activate your workbench, removing cubes from there to create more cubes. The cubes that you create go in your cauldron, and everybody does this at the same time. At the end of the round, everybody passes their cauldron to the player on the right and receives a cauldron from the player on their left, and they need to fit the cubes that they received. If you can't fit them, you return them to the player that sent them to you, and then that player places us in this area here. The first player to receive back 5 cubes that the player on the right could not fit on their workbench wins the game. So basically, you're just trying to create so many potions and in specific combinations to completely rack the bench of the opponent. That's the idea. And it may happen that multiple players get to 5 cubes sent back to them at the same time, and so there are a couple of tiebreakers there. Don't worry. And these cauldrons are just very, very adorable, on top of also being efficient, because see, there's a little edge here, so the wooden cubes that you place there will not fall. And again, they're represented by a pool of cubes. So surprise, surprise, I mentioned that. If you play with 5 players, chances are there's not going to be enough cubes here. So for example, this bag of blue cubes right now contains more cubes that came originally. They came from my personal cube collection. And so if you play with 5 players, it's possible that there just won't be enough cubes. Each player represents a unique witch. Yes, you can play with the standard witch to initiate, which has awesome art. I'll mention that. Look at that cat. But for gameplay purposes, having a unique witch is a lot more fun. You shuffle these cards, you give 2 to each player at the beginning of the game. They look at the cards, they choose one. That determines the initial cubes that go on their board, and once they determine that, you flip it, and then your unique witch will give you unique powers, and these powers will be available for the rest of the game, or less, if that is what the description says. Just an example of one that is not used for the whole game. And you can pause and read some of these if you're curious. So each player will represent a unique witch, and then we're pretty much ready to go after everybody receives their, again, initial cubes. Shuffle, shuffle, shuffle this deck of recipe cards, then give each player a hand of cards, and each player will select one. The idea of the gameplay is that each turn, each player will select a card simultaneously, then reveal it. The card may have an icon there, in which case, well, when you have one of a kind, nothing happens yet. Is when you have 2 of a kind, say 2 books or 2 cauldrons or 2 ravens, then a special effect applies, a special bonus applies. Again, you can pause and read if you want. If you want, there is a player rate to keep track of how many of those bonuses called Arcana you have. So, oh, I got 2 books in my tableau. However, this tracker here, and it has its own cute tokens, this tracker is printed on the back of the turn player rate, which is not great, because you gotta choose either or. If you're playing 2 players, there are enough for everybody to have one of each. You can also just count, okay, I got 2 cubes, so I got 2 books, so that's when I activate that effect. All right, that's how it works. So after a couple of turns, because each turn you'll get a new recipe, your personal play area may look a little bit like this, with, again, your workbench, which will have cubes on them, any bunch of recipes. Now, as you may have noticed, some recipes have an arrow, in which case the recipe can only be placed with the arrow pointing down, or some have the squiggly line. That means that the card can be placed in either orientation, but once it hits the table, it has to stay in that orientation. And then players simultaneously will use their recipes, will start making their recipes. Each card has two sections. The top section, or the section facing the top after you place the card, is the input, which is what you need to add to that card, and the bottom section is the output. So, for example, here, if I decide to activate my card, I take a white cube and two green cubes from my bench. Usually, that's a good way of cleaning the bench because I don't want it to be overwhelmed. I place those cubes there, and then I take from the supply in the middle of the table a black, a red, and a blue cube. And those cubes that go in the output, again, you will want them as much as possible to come from your workbench. They can also come from the output of other cards. And so the order in which you choose to activate them, which can change every turn, is extremely important. Suppose I don't have any blue, then but I have a white and two greens, so I activate that, I generate these, and then I take that blue and I place it there to generate that, and maybe then I place that white there to generate those. So that's the general idea. This is a tableau and engine building, in which, again, each turn you will receive a new recipe that you will add to your tableau. You may trigger effects every time you have a pair. Again, it's 2 cauldrons, or 4 or 6, 2 books, 2 raven, or 4 or 6. Odd numbers don't do anything. Get a recipe, possibly receive a bonus based on those arcana symbols. Then everybody goes crazy, activating their cards, trying to clear their workbench, and to generate not just as many cubes as possible, but the right combination. If my opponent doesn't have any green, it's going to take a lot of green making to overwhelm that line. Other lines are easier to overwhelm. So you make your own potions, and those will be basically the content of all of your output. Once you're done, every cube that's still in the output you put in your cauldron, you pass it there, you receive the other ones. Again, everybody takes their cubes and places them in their workbench. If they can, cubes that cannot be placed go back to a player who sent them, and those help them win if they are the first player to collect 5. This is it. It's that simple. A little touch is that cauldrons go one way, and cards, after you took a card from a handle card, you pass it to the left, and then you receive cards from the right, and then you take a card from the central deck. So there is that pick and pass, sushi go, 7 wonders element when it comes to the cards and when it comes to the cauldron. So it's almost like 2 of those mechanisms going together at the same time. But again, in essence, this is how you play Whirling Witchcraft. Whirling Witchcraft, bit of a mouthpiece, bit of a mouthful. It's really good. Surprisingly so. I read the rule book. I thought it's gonna be cute, simple filler, and it's still cute. It is still cute. It is still simple, but it's very enjoyable. I played it with a group of committed gamers, and we all loved it. We all like, oh my gosh, we need to play it again. It draws you in ways that are surprising. I mean, I was expecting, again, a variant on the Sushi Go idea, but then it turned out that this incredibly simple mechanism has so many interesting little elements, angles, things that you have to take into account. I guess this is the summer of engine building games. I see Furnace up there, and which I happened to have played like 2 weeks ago, and there are similarities here. You get cards, and then at the same time, everybody activates their engine created by cards in any order, a lot of strategy there. But then the 2 games still have different flavor, different feel. Whirling Witchcraft has more of a playful tone. The art is more fun than just, like rigid, fairly dark, dry-looking capitalism. It's still a great game. This one just has a lighter touch. a quintessential element of fun, probably also because of just the silliness of the topic of these really annoying witches that want to destroy each other's workbench. Zany, slightly zany topic, but what is really important is again that gameplay is surprisingly engaging when based on such a simple idea, because you're really taking into account so many factors. You're selecting a card. This recipe may or may not be super good right now, but it has the nice icon that may give me a one-time advantage that maybe will pay off in the long run, because I'm able to just rack your bench. So I'm kind of pushing my luck a little bit to see if this one big push is gonna work. I have to create an engine that is efficient based on what I have, based on what I see the player sitting next to me is producing, and so I know, well, I'm going to have a lot of green and white cubes. So I need to flash those out of my system, those out of my bench. At the same time, of course, I want effects that will possibly work with what one opponent is feeding me, and will overwhelm the next opponent. So it's such a simple idea, but it really works well because it gives you so many different factors to take into account. Those unique powers do affect gameplay considerably. They do add a lot of replay value. Playing with different witches, it's really different and presents you with unique sets of problems. One of my favorite ones is this overachiever that keeps generating extra cubes. On one hand, of course, that's a challenge because you're more at risk of getting your board filled too quickly. But at the same time, like, okay, this turn I want to activate this, I want to activate that. And so I need some extra red and some extra white to do this or that mega combo that will pay off later. Many different ideas, many different challenges, many interesting decisions. Really a nice balance here between agency and randomness, or I should say factors outside of your control, because that has to do with the cards that are handed to you. It has to do with what the player next to you is doing and handing you. But at the same time, again, agency in there because you really feel that the game pays off. Also, it's something I said in my review for Furnace. I like engine game buildings that don't last too long, and I said that not as a negative. There are games where you have built your engine and it starts running, and at that point, that's probably when the game should be over. First, it leaves you wanting for more because you want to play again to create that engine again. And also because if my engine is better than yours, so we can see that after a turn or two. We don't need to play an hour in which you're witnessing my engine producing and widening the gap. And that's one thing, of course, that modern game design has done, which is to cut down the game to the part of the game when it is fun. If a game, the last hour that you played, you know is going to win, the game should be an hour shorter. Whirling Witchcraft, like Furnace, does that. And so because of that, the end of the game can come up sometimes as a surprise because, oh my gosh, my engine now is going to work, and it works really well for a turn or two, and that's enough to produce those 5 cubes that, when sent to me, will give me victory. So also the game, the length of the game is just sweet. It's just where it should be. You get your engine and it works, and maybe 2 players are able to complete their main task at the same time. Then you go to the tiebreakers. But the length, the arc of the game is where an engine building game should have it, in my opinion. You start slow, then the engine starts generating things fast, and you have that thrill and that adrenaline boost, and that's it. That's the end of the game, which again leaves you wanting for more and leaves you want to set up the game and try it again. So you have an engine building game which is simple, fun, super simple rules, but a lot of nice wrinkles in there. Plays in about half an hour, and you will want to play it again over and over again. So Whirling Witchcraft, really simple game, but really fun. In the category of light games that you can set up and teach quickly, yet so much variety, yet a lot of interesting decisions, Whirling Witchcraft is definitely a good one.